The diner buzzed with the morning rush, the air thick with the aroma of coffee and sizzling bacon. Mia moved between tables with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to balance a dozen things at once. Her smile was the kind she'd perfected, polite and pleasant, even when her feet ached and her mind begged for a break. It was a morning like any other until the bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of Mr. Walsh. Mia braced herself. He was known for his sharp tongue and impossible demands, a storm cloud that darkened her day every time he came in. Today was no different. As she approached his table, tray in hand, Mr. Walsh barely glanced up from his newspaper. "You're late. I've been waiting for 10 minutes, he snapped, though Mia knew it had barely been 5. "I'm so sorry, sir," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "What can I get for you this morning?" He scoffed, his eyes hard as he scanned the menu. "It's not rocket science, girl. Just bring me my usual, and try not to mess it up this time." Mia nodded, swallowing the retort that rose in her throat. She scribbled down his order, her hands shaking just enough for the pen to slip, leaving a stray mark on her notepad. She hurried back to the counter, blinking back the sting in her eyes. It was just another bad customer, she told herself. But today, it cut deeper. As she served other tables, Mia couldn't shake the weight of his words. When she finally delivered his plate, he barely looked up, muttering, "Took you long enough?" He made a show of inspecting his food, and with a sneer he pushed the plate away. "This is cold. Typical." Mia stood frozen, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. "I can get you a new one, sir," she offered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't bother," he replied, waving her off dismissively. "Just like everything else in this dump, useless." The words clung to Mia like smoke, bitter and suffocating. She retreated behind the counter, desperately trying to compose herself. But as she glanced out over the tables, she noticed a kind face. A woman with gentle eyes who watched the exchange. When Mia brought her check, the woman slipped a small folded note into her hand, along with a tip that was far more than she expected. Mia opened the note and read the words scrawled inside. "Keep your head up. You are stronger than you know." She blinked, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. It was just a few words, but they anchored her in that moment, pulling her back from the edge. As she tucked the note into her apron pocket, Mia realized that maybe, just maybe, kindness had a way of finding people when they needed it most, even on the darkest of days. Mia tucked the note into her pocket, its simple message replaying in her mind. The diner hummed around her, but for the first time in a long while, the sting of Mr. Walsh's words didn't dominate her thoughts. She glanced back at the woman who had left the note, now slipping out the door with a gentle smile in Mia's direction. It was a brief moment, but it was enough to remind her that not everyone in the world was like Mr. Walsh. As the day wore on, the usual rhythm of the diner returned. Regulars chatting over their morning coffee, the clatter of dishes, and the occasional burst of laughter. Yet, Mia's mind kept drifting back to that note. It was just a few words, but they felt like a lifeline. When the lunch rush hit, Mia moved through the tables with a renewed sense of determination. She refilled coffee cups with a brighter smile, exchanged pleasantries with the regulars, and even managed to laugh at a joke from one of the old-timers who frequented the counter. But then, as she swept past the booth where Mr. Walsh sat brooding over his second cup of coffee, her confidence wavered. His eyes caught hers, and for a second she thought she saw a flicker of something different, maybe surprise, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She shook off the moment and turned her attention to a mother struggling with a fussy toddler in the corner booth. The young woman looked exhausted, her hair frazzled, and her eyes heavy with dark circles. As Mia approached, she noticed the mother fumbling through her purse, counting out crumpled bills. "Don't worry about the mess," Mia said gently, handing the woman a napkin as she mopped up spilled juice. "I'll take care of it." The mother offered a grateful smile, a glimmer of relief in her eyes. "Thank you. It's been one of those days." Mia nodded, remembering all too well what those days felt like. As she walked back to the counter, she slipped a few dollars from her own tips into the woman's check before handing it over. It wasn't much, but she hoped it might make her day a little easier. When the woman left, she pressed Mia's hand briefly. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means." Mia smiled, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she was more than just a waitress in a small-town diner. She was someone who could make a difference, even in small ways. The warm glow of the afternoon sunlight spilled through the windows, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Mia was clearing a table when she saw Mr. Walsh rise from his booth. He moved slowly, his steps deliberate, as if each one carried the weight of years. She braced herself, expecting another harsh comment as he approached the counter. But today, Mr. Walsh said nothing. He merely tossed a few crumpled bills onto the counter, not bothering to look up as he mumbled, "Keep the change." His voice lacked its usual edge, but Mia didn't dwell on it. She simply nodded, grateful for the silence. Yet, as she watched him leave, a thought nagged at the back of her mind. Why was he always so angry? What had made him this way? She shook her head, brushing aside the curiosity. It didn't matter. People like Mr. Walsh were beyond change. She had seen it too many times before. But even as she convinced herself of this, the note in her pocket seemed to whisper otherwise. The next morning, Mia walked into the diner with a fresh sense of purpose. She greeted each customer with a genuine smile, feeling lighter somehow, as if the heaviness of yesterday had lifted just a little. She even found herself humming along to the oldies playing over the diner's speakers. As she cleared a table near the window, a familiar face walked through the door, the woman who had left the note. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, then crossed the room with a tentative smile. "Hi, welcome back." The woman looked up, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good morning. I hope that note didn't come off as strange. I just thought you might need a little encouragement." Mia shook her head quickly, her voice catching in her throat. "No, it meant a lot. Thank you." The woman's smile softened. "I've been where you are. It's not easy. But sometimes, a little kindness can go a long way." Mia nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She wanted to say more, to thank her properly, but the bell above the door rang, and another wave of customers poured in. With a quick apology, she hurried off, but as she went about her work, her heart felt lighter. As the days passed, Mia noticed subtle changes in her interactions with customers. The small kindnesses she extended seemed to ripple through the diner, creating a shift in the atmosphere. The single mother returned, this time with a brighter smile and a fresh flower in her hair. She even left an extra tip for Mia, despite her tight budget. The old man who ate alone every Wednesday began bringing a book with him, lingering over his coffee as if the diner had become a place of comfort rather than routine. And a young couple who usually kept to themselves started chatting with Mia about their plans to move to the city. Through it all, Mr. Walsh continued his visits, his demeanor as prickly as ever. But Mia noticed things she hadn't before. The way his hands trembled slightly when he lifted his coffee cup, the deep lines etched around his eyes, and the loneliness that seemed to hang over him like a shadow. One evening, as Mia wiped down the counter after the dinner rush, she found herself thinking about him. She wondered what had made him so bitter, so angry at the world. And then, to her own surprise, she realized she no longer dreaded his visits. Instead, she felt a strange, quiet hope, a hope that maybe even someone like Mr. Walsh could change. It was a quiet afternoon when Mr. Walsh came in again, just before the dinner rush. He took his usual booth by the window, and Mia approached with a cup of coffee, as she always did. But today, she hesitated before turning away. "Is everything okay, Mr. Walsh?" she asked, surprising even herself with the question. He looked up sharply, as if startled that she had spoken to him. For a moment, there was only silence between them, heavy and uncertain. Then, to Mia's surprise, he sighed, a weary sound that seemed to deflate him. "It's fine. Just life catching up, I guess." Mia blinked, caught off guard by his candor. She shifted her weight, unsure of what to say. "Well, if you need anything, I'm here," she said finally, offering him a small smile. Mr. Walsh's expression softened for the briefest moment, and he gave a gruff nod. As Mia walked away, she couldn't help but feel that a door had opened, if only a crack, and she wondered what might happen if she tried to push it open just a little wider. The next few days passed in a blur of orders, coffee refills, and hurried conversations, but Mr. Walsh's uncharacteristic response lingered in Mia's thoughts. She caught herself glancing over at his usual booth whenever he was there, wondering if there was more to his story. Still, the walls he had built around himself seemed as solid as ever, and Mia knew better than to push. But one evening, as she was wiping down the counter, the familiar chime of the doorbell rang, followed by the shuffle of heavy steps. Mia looked up to see Mr. Walsh entering, his face paler than usual, his movements unsteady. He hesitated by the door, clutching his chest as if trying to catch his breath. Alarm shot through Mia, and she rushed over, her voice filled with concern. "Mr. Walsh, are you all right?" He waved her off weakly, but she noticed the way his hands trembled, his face contorted in pain. "It's just a spell," he mumbled, but his voice lacked its usual sharpness. "I'll be fine." Without waiting for him to refuse, Mia gently guided him to a chair near the counter, her heart pounding. "You need help. I'm calling an ambulance." For a moment he looked as though he might argue, but then he slumped back, too exhausted to protest. Mia called for help, her hands shaking as she dialed the number. As she stayed by his side, waiting for the paramedics, she noticed the fear in his eyes, vulnerable, raw, and painfully human. The other customers in the diner watched in hushed concern, and when the paramedics arrived, Mia stepped back to give them space. As they wheeled him out on a stretcher, Mr. Walsh turned his head toward her, his expression a mix of confusion and something that might have been gratitude. She offered him a reassuring smile, hoping he saw the sincerity behind it. When the ambulance doors closed and the sirens faded into the night, Mia stood in the diner's entryway, her hands still shaking. She wondered if she'd done the right thing, if he would make it through the night. She didn't know why, but she found herself hoping he would. The next morning, the diner was quieter than usual, as if the memory of the previous night still lingered in the air. Mia tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting to Mr. Walsh. She wondered if he was okay, if he had anyone to look after him, or if he was as alone as he seemed. Midway through the breakfast rush, her boss, a kind woman named Laura, pulled her aside. "I heard what happened last night. You did well, Mia. Not everyone would have stepped in like that." Mia shrugged, though she appreciated the words. "It just felt like the right thing to do, even if he's, well, you know how he is." Laura's expression softened. "Not everyone sees past the rough edges. You've got a good heart." Mia nodded, feeling a warmth settle in her chest. But when she returned to the counter, she found herself lost in thought. She had always believed that people like Mr. Walsh didn't change, that some wounds were too deep to heal. But maybe, just maybe, there was more to his story than she had realized. As the day wore on, she noticed the way the regulars spoke of what had happened. The elderly man who sat by the window muttered something about, "Hope he's all right," while the young couple left a note for Mia with their check. "Kindness matters. Thank you for reminding us." Even the single mother, who had become a familiar face, stopped by to ask if Mr. Walsh was okay. Mia tucked the notes into her pocket, feeling a strange sense of connection with the people around her. She had always thought of the diner as just a place where she worked, a means to pay the bills. But now, she realized it was something more. A community, a place where small acts of compassion could ripple outward. A few days later, Mia finished her shift and was gathering her things when she spotted a figure standing just outside the diner's glass doors. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the familiar slouch of Mr. Walsh. He looked different somehow, more fragile, as if the hospital stay had taken something out of him. She hesitated, then pushed open the door. "Mr. Walsh?" she called softly, stepping into the chilly evening air. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be resting?" He turned toward her, his face partially hidden in the shadows. "I got out of the hospital this morning," he replied gruffly. "Just wanted to say thanks for, what you did." Mia was stunned. It was the first time she had ever heard gratitude in his voice. She stepped closer, searching his face for the usual scowl, but instead, she found something that looked like uncertainty. "You don't have to thank me," she said gently. "I was just doing what anyone would have done." "Not everyone would have done that for me," he muttered, looking down at the ground. I know I'm not exactly easy to deal with." Mia felt a pang of sympathy, and before she could think better of it, she found herself saying, "Why don't you come inside? It's getting cold, and I could use some company while I close up." For a moment he looked like he might refuse, but then he gave a reluctant nod. Together, they walked back into the diner, the bell above the door chiming softly behind them. Mia poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the counter to Mr. Walsh. He took it with a stiff nod, cradling the cup between his hands as if savoring its warmth. They sat in silence for a while, the quiet hum of the diner settling around them like a blanket. Finally, Mia broke the silence. "You never mentioned what put you in the hospital, if you don't mind me asking." Mr. Walsh hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. For a moment she thought he might brush her off, but then he let out a long sigh. "Heart problems," he admitted. "Doctors say I need to take it easy, but that's never been my strong suit." Mia nodded, listening intently. "It must be hard, doing all that alone." He gave a bitter chuckle. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when you push everyone away." His voice softened, and for the first time, Mia saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "Lost my wife a few years back. After that, I just stopped trying to be a decent person, I guess. It was easier to be angry." Mia's heart ached at his words. She had always assumed his rudeness was just part of who he was, but now she saw the deeper pain behind it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Losing someone like that, it changes you." He glanced up, meeting her gaze with a searching look. "Yeah, it does. But maybe not forever. You made me think about things, about the way I've been living." Mia offered him a small, tentative smile. "It's never too late to change, you know, to try again." He didn't respond right away, but there was a softness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. And, as they sat together in the quiet diner, Mia felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that, perhaps, against all odds, this unlikely connection could lead to something better. Word of Mr. Walsh's change in demeanor spread through the diner like wildfire. Customers who once avoided him started to notice the subtle differences, the way he greeted Mia with a nod instead of a scowl, the fact that he now left a tip instead of just loose change. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but it was enough to make people take notice. One morning, the single mother approached Mia with a shy smile. "I saw you talking to that old grump the other day. He seemed different." Mia chuckled, shaking her head. "He's got his rough edges, but there's more to him than I thought." The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's nice to see people change. Gives the rest of us hope, you know." Mia smiled at her words, realizing that she was starting to believe it too. As the days turned into weeks, she continued to see small changes in Mr. Walsh. He still had his moments, times when his temper flared or his words came out sharper than he intended. But there was a gentleness in him now, a willingness to apologize, that had been absent before. And each time he softened. Each time he reached out with a clumsy word of thanks or a rare smile, Mia felt her own heart grow a little lighter. She realized that the kindness she had offered him had changed her too, made her braver, more open to the world around her. As winter settled in, the diner took on a cozy atmosphere, with the windows fogged by warmth and holiday lights twinkling outside. The regulars shared stories of holiday plans, and Mia found herself looking forward to her shifts in a way she hadn't in years. The quiet, shared moments with Mr. Walsh became part of her routine, something she almost found herself looking forward to. But not every day was easy. Despite his efforts to change, Mr. Walsh sometimes slipped back into old habits. One particularly cold afternoon, he snapped at Mia when she refilled his coffee too slowly, his words laced with the old bitterness. "Can't you ever get anything right?" he muttered, barely looking up. The remark hit Mia harder than she expected. She turned away quickly, blinking back the sting of tears. For a moment, she wondered if all the effort had been pointless, if people like Mr. Walsh were just too set in their ways to truly change. The warmth she had begun to feel toward him was replaced with a sharp doubt, and she found herself questioning whether she had been foolish to believe in him. That evening, after her shift, Mia sat alone in the empty diner, staring out at the snow-covered street. The note from the kind stranger was still tucked in her apron, worn from being read so many times. She pulled it out, running her fingers over the familiar words. "Keep your head up. You are stronger than you know." Mia sighed, feeling the weight of the day settle in her chest. She had wanted to believe that kindness could change people, but maybe she had been naive. Maybe some hearts were just too hard to reach. Yet, even as she thought this, a part of her resisted. She remembered the look in Mr. Walsh's eyes that night when he had spoken about his late wife, the way his voice had softened with regret. She remembered the way he had thanked her, awkward but sincere. It was enough to make her hesitate, to wonder if perhaps change wasn't a straight line, but a series of steps forward and back. She tucked the note back into her pocket, deciding that for now she would keep trying. After all, she thought, isn't that what kindness is about? Choosing to see the best in people, even when it's hard? The next day, Mia walked into the diner with a renewed sense of determination. As she tied on her apron and began her shift, she caught sight of Mr. Walsh sitting in his usual booth. He seemed different, quieter, his shoulders hunched as if he was bracing himself against the world. When she brought over his coffee, she hesitated, then spoke softly. "Morning, Mr. Walsh. How are you today?" He glanced up and she was surprised to see a shadow of guilt in his eyes. He shifted in his seat, avoiding her gaze. "About yesterday," he began, his voice rough. "I didn't mean what I said. I was having a bad day, but that's no excuse. I'm sorry." Mia blinked, caught off guard. She had never heard him apologize so directly before. For a moment, she didn't know what to say, but then she offered him a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I appreciate that." He nodded, looking down at his coffee. You're different, you know that? Not many people would put up with an old fool like me." Mia felt a warmth spread through her chest, but she kept her tone light. "Well, I guess I've got a soft spot for old fools." To her surprise, a faint chuckle escaped him, rough and unpracticed, but real. It was a small moment, but it felt like a step forward, one that reminded Mia why she had chosen to hold on to hope in the first place. As the weeks passed, the relationship between Mia and Mr. Walsh continued to evolve, sometimes in unexpected ways. He began to ask her about her life, small, hesitant questions about her family and her plans for the future. At first, she was guarded, but slowly, she found herself opening up, sharing bits and pieces of her dreams. One quiet afternoon, as snow fell gently outside the diner windows, Mr. Walsh surprised Mia with a question. "What's someone like you doing stuck in a place like this?" She laughed, though his question caught her off guard. "What do you mean, someone like me?" He shrugged, staring into his coffee. "You're young. You've got that spark, the kind that doesn't come around often. You ever think about doing something else?" Mia thought about it for a moment, her smile fading slightly. "I used to. Thought I'd go to school, maybe study art, but life got in the way." He nodded, as if he understood all too well. "Funny thing about life, it has a way of knocking you off course." Mia looked at him, seeing the sadness in his eyes, the weight of regrets that clung to his every word. She wondered what he might have been like before grief had hardened him. "It's never too late to start over, you know. Maybe we both have a second chance." Mr. Walsh didn't respond right away, but she saw the way his expression shifted, as if the idea had never occurred to him before. And in that moment, something seemed to shift between them, a fragile understanding, born of shared disappointments and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As the holidays approached, the diner took on a festive air. Red and gold decorations hung from the ceiling, and Laura, the owner, set up a small Christmas tree by the entrance. The regulars brought in treats, and customers exchanged stories about their holiday traditions. For the first time in years, Mia felt a sense of warmth and belonging that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. One chilly evening, Mr. Walsh showed up with something that left everyone speechless, a stack of wrapped gifts, one for each of the waitstaff, including Mia. He placed them on the counter with a gruff, awkward gesture, as if unsure of what to do with his hands. "Just a little something for the holidays," he muttered, avoiding everyone's gaze. Mia stared at the gifts, her heart swelling with emotion. She exchanged a stunned glance with her coworkers, then turned back to Mr. Walsh, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you. It means a lot." He shrugged, but she could see the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's nothing. Just figured I owed you all for putting up with me." Mia reached out, squeezing his hand gently. "You don't owe us anything, Mr. Walsh, but we're glad you're here." He nodded, swallowing hard, and for a moment Mia thought she saw the glimmer of unshed tears in his eyes. It was a fleeting moment, but it spoke volumes, a testament to how far they had come. On Christmas Eve, the diner was bustling with families and regulars, everyone gathered to share a warm meal and exchange good wishes. The air was filled with laughter and the clinking of cutlery, and Mia found herself caught up in the festive spirit. She was busy clearing a table when she noticed Mr. Walsh standing by the entrance, a hesitant look on his face. He held a small, wrapped gift in his hands, and Mia couldn't help but feel a pang of curiosity. She walked over, offering him a welcoming smile. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Walsh. What brings you here tonight?" He shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at the gift. "Wanted to drop this off. It's for you." He thrust the package toward her, his expression guarded. "Figured you might appreciate it." Mia took the gift, her hands trembling slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside was a simple sketchbook, the pages blank and waiting to be filled. Tucked inside the cover was a small note in his shaky handwriting. "For your dreams. It's never too late to try." She looked up at him, her vision blurred with tears. "Mr. Walsh, I don't know what to say." He cleared his throat, looking away as if embarrassed. "Don't need to say anything. Just thought you might like it." Mia reached out and hugged him, a spontaneous gesture that seemed to surprise them both. For a moment he stiffened, but then his arms wrapped around her in a hesitant embrace. When they pulled apart, he gave her a small, genuine smile, one that transformed his face in a way she'd never seen before. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. It means the world to me." As he left the diner that night, Mia stood by the door, clutching the sketchbook to her chest. She realized that in giving her this gift, Mr. Walsh had offered her more than just a kind gesture. He had given her the belief that dreams were still possible, even in the face of life's hardships. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the diner and the quiet magic of the season, she knew that they had both found something they had lost, a second chance, wrapped in the quiet, unexpected power of kindness. Absolutely. Keeping the initial prompt in mind, here's the continuation of the story, maintaining the focus on a brisk pace, emotional depth, and the theme of kindness and transformation. With the new year came a cold snap, the kind that bit through layers of clothing and left the streets quiet and empty. The diner, however, remained a refuge for those seeking warmth and a hot cup of coffee. Mia noticed that Mr. Walsh visited more frequently, though he rarely stayed long. Their conversations had become a bit more relaxed, the edges of his usual brusqueness softened. But one bitterly cold evening, as Mia was preparing to close up, the bell above the door rang. She turned to see Mr. Walsh standing there, his expression drawn and troubled. His face was pale, his hands stuffed deep in his coat pockets. Mia's heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Walsh, is everything okay?" He looked at her, his eyes shadowed with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Needed to talk to someone. Didn't know who else to turn to." Mia gestured to a booth, her concern deepening. "Of course. Sit down, I'll make us some coffee." As she poured the steaming cups, Mr. Walsh spoke in a low, halting voice. He told her about the financial struggles he had been facing since his medical bills started piling up, how he feared losing his home, the place where he and his wife had built their life together. He spoke about his loneliness, the way it gnawed at him, especially during the long, empty nights. "I spent so many years pushing people away, thinking I didn't need anyone," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Now, I don't know how to ask for help." Mia felt a lump rise in her throat. She had never imagined that beneath his gruff exterior was someone so profoundly lost. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to go through this alone, Mr. Walsh. There are people who care. We'll find a way to get through this." He looked at her with a flicker of hope, as if daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something better. But as he glanced away, she could see the doubt still lurking in his expression, the fear that kindness might not be enough to change his reality. The next day, Mia made a decision. She gathered the staff of the diner and shared Mr. Walsh's struggles with them, hoping that together they could find a way to help him. To her surprise, the idea caught on quickly. The regulars, moved by Mr. Walsh's story, began contributing in small ways, dropping off groceries, slipping a little extra cash into a donation jar Laura had discreetly placed by the register. Mia couldn't believe how the community had rallied around him. She knew it wouldn't solve all his problems, but it was a start. It was proof that sometimes the smallest acts could add up to something much bigger. One evening, Mia brought Mr. Walsh a basket of food, along with a small envelope containing the donations. She knocked on the door of his modest home, a place that now looked worn and weary like its owner. He answered with a look of surprise, his eyes widening as he saw what she held in her hands. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice catching. Mia smiled, feeling her own eyes prick with tears. "It's from the folks at the diner. They all wanted to help. You don't have to go through this alone, Mr. Walsh. None of us do." For a moment, he just stared at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Then, to her astonishment, he reached out and pulled her into a hug, his grip tight and trembling. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I've been so awful to everyone, especially to you." Mia hugged him back, her own heart full. "You deserve kindness just as much as anyone else. We all make mistakes, but we also get to choose how we move forward." As she pulled back, she saw tears in his eyes, and for the first time he didn't try to hide them. It was as if a dam had broken, and all the years of bitterness and regret were finally being washed away. Despite the progress, life continued to test Mr. Walsh and Mia in ways they hadn't anticipated. The diner faced a slow season, with fewer customers braving the winter chill, and Mr. Walsh's financial situation grew increasingly precarious. Mia could see the toll it took on him, the return of his anxious frowns, the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of his worries. One evening, as they sat together over a late cup of coffee, Mr. Walsh voiced his doubts. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this, for starting over. Sometimes it feels like the world is just waiting to push me back down." Mia's heart ached at his words. She understood that feeling all too well, the fear that hope might be a trap set by life to let you down. But she also knew how much he had changed, how far he had come. She reached out, her voice firm. "You've already made it this far, Mr. Walsh. You've shown more courage than most people ever do. Don't give up now." He looked at her, a shadow of uncertainty still lingering in his eyes. But there was also a glimmer of determination, a spark that hadn't been there before. "Maybe you're right, I guess I'll try." As winter melted into spring, Mr. Walsh slowly began to find his footing. He took on small handyman jobs around town, fixing fences and repairing leaky roofs. He even started volunteering at a local soup kitchen, inspired by the kindness he had received. The work was hard, but it gave him a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. One sunny afternoon, Mia found herself at her usual spot behind the counter when Mr. Walsh walked in, carrying a large, wrapped package. He placed it on the counter with a bashful grin, his cheeks flushed from the effort. "What's this?" Mia asked, her curiosity piqued. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking almost sheepish. "It's for you. Call it a thank you gift." Mia tore open the wrapping to reveal a framed painting, one of her own sketches, transformed into a beautifully rendered landscape. It was the drawing she had left on the counter one slow afternoon, a small doodle she hadn't thought much of, but in Mr. Walsh's hands it had become something vibrant and alive. Mia stared at the painting, her vision blurring with tears. Mr. Walsh, it's beautiful. I don't know how to thank you." He shrugged, but there was a warmth in his eyes that spoke of pride. "You told me it's never too late to start over. Figured I'd pick up my old brushes again. I thought you might like this." Mia reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I do, more than you know." And in that moment, as they stood together, surrounded by the sounds of the bustling diner and the warmth of newfound friendship, they both realized that they had found something far more precious than they had lost, a second chance, and the belief that kindness could indeed change everything. With spring came new opportunities, both for Mia and for Mr. Walsh. The diner bustled with life again, and Laura even promoted Mia to assistant manager, recognizing her dedication and the positive changes she had brought to the place. Mia took on the new role with excitement, eager to continue making a difference in her little corner of the world. Mr. Walsh, meanwhile, had become something of a regular at the soup kitchen, where he found a surprising sense of satisfaction in helping others. He no longer stayed hidden behind the walls of his loneliness, and while he was still rough around the edges, people saw the change in him. He was learning to laugh again, to share stories, and to be part of a community. One evening, as the sun set behind the diner, casting a golden glow over the town, Mia and Mr. Walsh sat together outside on the porch, sipping their coffee. The air was warm with the promise of summer, and the world felt alive with possibility. "Funny how life turns out, isn't it?" Mr. Walsh mused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Didn't think I'd ever find a place where I felt like I belonged again." Mia smiled, looking at him with genuine affection. "We all have our dark days, but sometimes all it takes is a little light to show us the way back." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You were that light for me, you know. I don't think I ever told you that." She reached out, squeezing his shoulder gently. "And you were mine, Mr. Walsh, more than you'll ever know." As they sat together, watching the sun dip below the hills, they realized that their journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by the quiet strength of kindness that had brought them back from the edge. Got it. I'll continue the story with engaging developments, maintaining a focus on the emotional journey of the characters and the theme of transformation through kindness. Here's the next set of chapters. With the arrival of summer, the diner became busier than ever. Tourists passed through town, and regulars enjoyed the longer days with iced tea and pie on the porch. Mia found herself thriving in her new role as assistant manager, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. Even Mr. Walsh seemed to be adjusting to his new life, embracing small moments of joy. One sweltering afternoon, a man entered the diner, his suit slightly rumpled and his face drawn with fatigue. He hesitated by the door, scanning the room until his gaze settled on Mr. Walsh, who sat at his usual booth by the window. Mia noticed the way Mr. Walsh stiffened, his grip tightening around his coffee cup. She approached the stranger with a friendly smile. "Hi there, welcome. Can I get you anything?" The man shook his head, his expression uncertain. "Actually, I'm looking for Mr. Walsh. My name's Peter. I'm his son." Mia blinked, glancing back at Mr. Walsh, who looked as if he'd seen a ghost. He hadn't mentioned having a son, and she suddenly realized how little she truly knew about his past. She turned back to the man, offering a nod. "He's right over there." Peter walked over, each step hesitant, as if he were afraid of what he might find. As he reached the booth, Mr. Walsh slowly stood, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Peter," he said, his voice rough with years of unspoken words. "It's been a long time." Peter swallowed, looking down at his hands. "Yeah, it has. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." Mr. Walsh's expression softened, a hint of regret crossing his face. "You're my son. I'll always want to see you." Mia watched from a distance, feeling a knot of emotion tighten in her chest. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but the tension between them was palpable. She only hoped that this unexpected reunion might be a chance for Mr. Walsh to heal another part of his past. Peter stayed in town for the next few days, and Mia often saw him and Mr. Walsh sitting together at the diner, their conversations long and serious. She kept her distance, giving them the privacy they needed, but she couldn't help but notice the weight that seemed to lift from Mr. Walsh's shoulders after each meeting. One evening, after Peter had left, Mr. Walsh lingered behind, nursing a cup of tea. Mia joined him at the counter, sensing that he needed to talk. "Your son seems like a good man," she said gently. Mr. Walsh nodded, a faraway look in his eyes. "He is. Didn't get that from me, though." He paused, then let out a sigh. "I made a lot of mistakes with him. After his mother died, I couldn't handle it. I pushed him away, just like I pushed everyone away." Mia reached out, resting a hand on his arm. "But he came back, Mr. Walsh. That means something. It means there's still a chance to make things right." He met her gaze, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You really believe that, don't you? That people can change?" Mia smiled, her voice soft but firm. "I do, because I've seen it, and because you've shown me that it's possible." Mr. Walsh looked away, blinking back the emotion, but there was a hint of a smile on his lips, a tentative hope that hadn't been there before. As the weeks passed, the relationship between Mr. Walsh and Peter began to heal, slowly but surely. Peter visited the diner almost daily, and their conversations grew warmer, more comfortable. Mia could see the change in Mr. Walsh, how he seemed to stand a little taller, how the bitterness that had once clung to him like a shadow had started to fade. One afternoon, Peter approached Mia while Mr. Walsh was in the restroom. He looked at her with a grateful smile. "I just wanted to thank you. I don't know what you did, but my father's different. He's trying, and I don't think that would have happened without you." Mia felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I didn't do much. He's the one who decided to change." Peter shook his head. "You did more than you realize. You gave him a reason to believe he could be better, and that means more than I can say." Mia smiled, touched by his words. As Peter walked away, she found herself thinking about how much had changed in just a few short months. The diner, once a place of routine and resignation, had become a place of hope and second chances, and it was all because of a single act of kindness that had set everything into motion. But life, as always, had a way of throwing unexpected challenges. One stormy evening, a burst pipe flooded the back of the diner, leaving water pooling across the floor. Laura, the owner, rushed in, her face pale with worry. "We'll have to close for a while, Mia. I'm not sure how long it'll take to fix this." Mia's heart sank at the news. The diner had become more than just a job to her. It was her refuge, her connection to the people she had grown to care about, especially Mr. Walsh. She helped Laura and the rest of the staff clean up, but her thoughts kept drifting to what this closure might mean for the community they had built together. The next day, Mr. Walsh showed up at the diner, finding Mia and Laura sweeping water from the floor. He frowned as he took in the scene. "What happened?" Laura sighed, her expression weary. "Pipe burst. We're going to have to close until it's fixed, maybe longer if we can't afford the repairs." Mia saw the worry flash across Mr. Walsh's face, and for a moment she wondered if this setback would be too much for him. But then he surprised her by stepping forward, rolling up his sleeves. "I used to do some plumbing work back in the day. Let me see what I can do." Together, they worked late into the night, with Mr. Walsh guiding them through the repairs. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Mia feared it wouldn't be enough. But seeing Mr. Walsh take charge, his determination unwavering, filled her with a renewed sense of hope. After a week of hard work, the diner finally reopened. The regulars returned, grateful for their familiar place, and Laura threw a small celebration to thank everyone who had helped. Mr. Walsh, usually so reluctant to be the center of attention, found himself surrounded by people expressing their gratitude. Mia watched him from the counter, a smile tugging at her lips. She saw how he laughed with the elderly man who always sat by the window, how he offered a few words of encouragement to the single mother who often struggled to make ends meet. It was as if he had found his place in the world again, a place that he had once thought lost forever. As the evening wound down, Mr. Walsh approached Mia, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, their petals bright against the dusk. He offered them to her with a shy, awkward smile. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to thank you for everything." Mia took the flowers, her heart swelling with emotion. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Walsh. I think we've both learned a lot from each other." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I think you're right. And I think I'm ready to keep trying, to keep being better." She smiled at him, her voice warm. "That's all any of us can do, just keep trying." As summer came to a close, the diner continued to thrive, filled with the laughter and warmth that had come to define it. Mia and Mr. Walsh found themselves slipping into an easy friendship, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the profound. It was a quiet, steady bond, built on shared moments and mutual respect. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Mr. Walsh spoke in a low, thoughtful voice. "You know, when I first walked into this place, I never thought I'd find anything worth holding on to, but now, I think I've found more than I ever expected." Mia looked at him, seeing the man he had become, and felt a sense of pride well up inside her. "You've come a long way, Mr. Walsh, and I'm glad I got to be a part of that journey." He gave her a small, grateful smile, the kind that held more meaning than words ever could. "So am I, Mia. So am I." As the sun set, casting the world in shades of gold and crimson, they sat in companionable silence, content in the knowledge that they had both found something truly special, a friendship forged in kindness, a second chance that had changed them both forever. Autumn arrived with its cool breezes and vibrant leaves, painting the small town in hues of gold and red. The diner continued to bustle, its tables filled with regulars sharing stories over steaming mugs of coffee. The sense of community that had blossomed over the past months was stronger than ever, with each person playing a part in creating an atmosphere of warmth and belonging. Mia found herself reflecting on how much had changed, not just in the diner, but within herself. She felt stronger, more confident in her role, and more hopeful about her future. The sketchbook Mr. Walsh had given her became a symbol of that hope, filled with new drawings and ideas that she hadn't dared to dream about before. One evening, as the last of the customers left and the sun dipped below the hills, Mr. Walsh lingered behind. He seemed more pensive than usual, his gaze distant as he watched the leaves swirl outside the window. Mia approached him, sensing that something was on his mind. "You've got that look again," she said with a teasing smile. "What's going on?" He chuckled softly, then turned to face her, his expression more serious. "Peter's offered me a place closer to him, said he could use some help with his business and, well, he wants me around more." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment would come eventually, but it still caught her off guard. That's wonderful, Mr. Walsh. I'm so happy for you." He nodded, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I'm not sure I'm ready to leave this place. It's become more than just a diner to me. It's been home." Mia reached out, squeezing his hand gently. "Home isn't just a place. It's the people who care about you, and you'll always have a place here, no matter where life takes you." He looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into a warm, steady hug. "Thank you, Mia, for giving me back something I thought I'd lost forever." Mia felt tears prick at her eyes, but she held them back, wanting this moment to be filled with joy rather than sadness. "You did that yourself, Mr. Walsh. I just gave you a little nudge." They stood there for a while, the weight of goodbye lingering between them. And though it was bittersweet, there was a sense of rightness to it, a recognition that this chapter of their lives had reached its natural conclusion. Mr. Walsh's last day in town came quickly. He arrived at the diner for one final breakfast, the regulars gathering to wish him well. Laura presented him with a homemade pie, and the single mother gave him a card filled with signatures and messages from the community. Even the elderly man who rarely spoke offered a gruff, heartfelt farewell. Mia prepared his usual order, eggs, toast, and a cup of coffee, knowing it would be the last time she served him. As she set the plate in front of him, she couldn't help but smile. One last meal on the house. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're too kind, Mia. You know that?" She shrugged, her smile growing wistful. "I think I learned it from someone." As they shared one last conversation, the diner filled with laughter and stories, Mia felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. She knew that she would miss Mr. Walsh, but she also knew that his leaving wasn't an end. It was a new beginning for both of them. 2 weeks after Mr. Walsh left town, a package arrived at the diner, addressed to Mia. She opened it with curious hands, finding a small wooden box inside. Nestled within was a painting, another one of her sketches, transformed into a vibrant scene of the diner at sunset, with its warm light spilling out onto the empty street. Tucked into the frame was a note in Mr. Walsh's familiar, shaky handwriting. "Mia, thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists in this world. I'm finding my way, one day at a time, and it's because you showed me how. I hope this painting reminds you of all the lives you've touched, just like you've touched mine. Keep dreaming, keep drawing, and keep believing in the good. Your friend, W." Mia smiled through her tears, clutching the note to her chest. She hung the painting in the diner, where it caught the evening light and became a reminder of the power of a single act of kindness, a reminder that no matter how dark the world might seem, there is always a chance for change. Months passed, and the seasons changed again, but the memory of Mr. Walsh lingered in the diner, woven into the stories people shared over their meals. The sketchbook he had given Mia became the start of a new chapter in her life. She began taking art classes at a local community center, finding joy in the creative process that she had once feared she'd lost. The diner remained a place of connection, a place where strangers became friends and kindness was passed from one person to the next. And every time Mia looked at the painting Mr. Walsh had sent her, she felt a surge of gratitude for the chance to see the good in others and for the reminder that small actions can change a life. One sunny afternoon, as Mia poured a cup of coffee for a new customer, she caught a glimpse of herself in the window, a reflection of someone who had learned to believe in second chances. She smiled, knowing that her journey, like Mr. Walsh's, was far from over, and she hoped that wherever he was, he too had found peace, surrounded by the warmth and love he had once thought he'd lost forever. The story is focusing on the lasting impact that kindness and compassion can have. It emphasizes the theme that change is possible for anyone, no matter how deep their struggles, and that small acts can create ripples that spread far beyond what we might imagine. The epilogue serves as a reflection on the growth of both characters, leaving the reader with a sense of hope and a reminder of the transformative power of empathy. In the end, Mia and Mr. Walsh's story is a testament to the power of second chances and the impact that one small act of kindness can have. It shows that even the most unlikely friendships can blossom when we look beyond our differences and choose compassion over judgment. Their journey wasn't easy, filled with setbacks, doubts, and moments of vulnerability, but it proved that change is always possible. Through their connection, they learned to heal old wounds, embrace new beginnings, and find hope in places they never expected. Mia's belief in kindness helped her grow into someone who could inspire others, while Mr. Walsh's transformation showed that no matter how lost we may feel, there's always a way back to the light. Together, they turned a simple diner into a haven of warmth and community, a place where strangers became friends and where small gestures made a world of difference. Their story reminds us that we all have the power to make a difference, even in the smallest ways. And sometimes, it's those little acts, like a kind word, a listening ear, or a helping hand, that can change a life forever. If this story moved you, take a moment today to reach out to someone with an act of kindness. Whether it's offering a compliment, listening to a friend in need, or just sharing a smile with a stranger, your actions have the power to make a real difference. And if you've ever experienced a moment of unexpected kindness, share your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that the world can be a better place when we choose to lift each other up. Remember, no act of kindness is ever too small. It might just be the spark that someone else needs to keep going.